Here we go. I know there's some people who are with us, but weren't able to attend today. So we'll get that recording going and I will share my screen. So I have an introductory activity for you. And this isn't mine, but this is an original, or what I've done. It came from costarters.com, and I think they're actually in Great Britain. But it really fit with today's topic, and it really fit with the whole concept of working cross-sectoral and collaborative. And so here's your introductory icebreaker. I'm asking you, what is your ecosystem building superpower? An ecosystem is another way that people are describing multi-sectoral collaboration. So it might take a little bit of time for you, and do not be modest in terms of, this is really about acknowledging your gifts and your own assets.
Can we be two if we can't nail it down to one?
Yes, absolutely. I should have said that, Jennifer. That's a great question. Okay, are you ready?
Sure, I'll start us off.
Okay.
So I would say gate opener, because I frequently refer to myself as a community connector. And one of the biggest strengths I have is in connecting people and organizations and everything across the city. So that one definitely fits for me and resonates with me. And as well, I would have said the resource mapper as well too. So in my organization and my team, I'm kind of known as that person who holds the information. So I've actually been with the city longer than any of my other coworkers right now. So I have a little more of the history, the relationships with the community, and I continue to just research and find information and do courses like this and everything that I can to continually build and grow, and then share that back to the community and to the groups that I work with.
That's great, Jennifer. You're very articulate in terms of, and concise in terms of explaining. That's great. Good job.
Thank you.
That's an important competency for a community leader and a community builder, for sure. Okay, who wants to go next?
Well, those were the two I had picked out too, probably first resource mapper and then second gate opener, but those are the two that had jumped out for me, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, knowing you, I can see that. Thank you. Yeah. And Melody, Shanique, yeah.
I was just unmuted, but I'm not even sure. I keep reading through them and I'm like, which am I? The one that stuck out the most to me was community champion. Because whenever I'm on a team, I do rally different people around just to that one common vision and keep us focused towards that. I'm not sure.
No, it does sound like you, but there's no right or wrong. There's no right or wrong here. When you did your leadership style, were you an energizer?
I feel like I can't remember.
I think you were, and that's typically that would align for sure.
So I'm organizer here.
Oh, you're an organizer too. Okay.
But I can't remember what the other one was.
Okay. Doesn't matter, but it does sound like you from what I've learned about you. So it's a good fit.
Alrighty.
And what about you, Melody?
I'd have to say for sure a wee bit of a little bit of resource mapper, maybe a bit of mad scientist, and actually rainmaker.
Nice. That's true. That is you.
Yeah.
Okay. So why, I think what's reassuring for me is that I think you all have a really good sense of your gifts and your strengths, but why why would I ask you about what role where you think you fit? What's your superpower? Because this is really about the different roles that are necessary for bringing a community together. Why would I ask you, what's the takeaway, not only knowing your own assets, but what your own superpower? What else does this tell you?
Who else you need to kind of bring on board, I think, in terms of building a well-rounded team.
That's absolutely, that's it, really. I mean, I think what I want to do more than anything is reinforce it, that you can't do it by yourself, that you really do need a team. And now more than ever, this is really about working with a cohort or a community group or a community committee or community task force. And so this is something to keep in mind in terms of how you recruit to fill that. I mean, I'm doing the same thing right now with a startup in terms of thinking about the strengths that I want in terms of who sits on the board of directors, right? So it is the same thing. You need this variety and you need people who are good at things that you aren't. So keep that in mind. Okay, so now, are you okay with me doing a quick recap of module 1 and 2 before we dig deeper into, sorry, it's part 1 and part 2. A quick recap of part 1 and 2, and then we can dive a little bit deeper into the actual tools and resources. Does that work for you? Oh,
I'm good with that, but I'm being selfish because I didn't go through the content.
Well, it will give you a chance to, even if you have seen them, you can jump in with any questions you might have or any reflections that you've had. How about that? So we can tap into those who have had a chance to think about them too. Okay, I'm just going to take that as a yes, and I can't see Linda nodding, but I bet she is. So how many of you have heard of Meg Wheatley? Margaret Wheatley?
This morning.
Good. She's the one. There's a famous quote that says, "Never doubt that a small group of concerned citizens can't change the world. Indeed, that's the only thing that ever has." That's Meg Wheatley. And I came across this quote from her and I think it's just so relevant, because what she's saying is a leader today needs to be the one who convenes people. And I think that that's a missing role a lot of times. Because we need all viewpoints. I always say we need all experiences and different filters, different experiences to get to our collective wisdom. And I really like that she explained it that way. So I have a very sensitive mouse, I'm telling you. So I think that when we talk about groups and cohorts and working with them, it really is about the process of bringing people together. So this might seem a little bit confusing, but this will hopefully bring together much of what you've learned already. This for me is a really key graphic, because the why that we're trying to get to, the outcome in almost every case, is individual, community, economic, and environmental well-being. So whatever we're trying to do, it fits in there somewhere, but it's getting more complicated to get there. And what we learned, and this really happened primarily in Alberta. And so I'm always happy to be able to share it with people from Alberta, because it's what we observed worked. The communities, the neighborhoods that were doing well, what was it that they did? And it really shifted my thinking and my previous experience into something different. So really today we're more focused on path 1, phase 1, which is about prioritizing the development of a community leadership cohort or a multi-sectoral network or an ecosystem. And so that is really critical, because it needs to represent diverse stakeholders. And this is, again, recognizing that you don't have to have the answers. You need to build a cohort, and who can then call the meeting and work with others. So that's phase 1. That's what we learned of the communities that did well. They had a cohort that had representation from business, from government, from citizens, from nonprofits. That's who were there on their cohort. And the shift for me was that in my personal work, I think I always wanted to be really inclusive. And so when I used to first call the meetings, I wanted to invite as many people as possible. And that's really kind of how we started out in Alberta. And what we learned was that it was too chaotic for a lot of people. And that's why it's really important to understand leadership styles, that it was too much in one of our communities, we had a group of volunteer firefighters who threw up their hands at the first meeting and said, call us when you're ready to put shovels in the ground, which is their way of saying, when it's clear and you need some help, call us. And some people are like that. And that's important to understand. So, start with that smaller group. And then what we learned is that smaller group can't always tackle the big picture, the real messy, complicated change. It's more important to facilitate citizen-driven micro projects, things that build on a community's or an organization's, their strengths rather than their needs. I mean, if we can eliminate that word from the planning process, the whole idea of needs assessment, I did not see communities succeed who focused on needs. They were instead ones who focused on their assets and their strengths. And they used their strengths a lot of times to address needs, but their starting point was always assets. What do you love about your community? What are we doing well? So, it was low-hanging fruit a lot of times, small projects. They built trust. They really did get to know one another, and they got to know a lot of the other more challenging issues. And only then were they ready to tackle systems change, the big, messy, chaotic changes. So any questions about that? Can you relate that to any of your own experience where things have worked or haven't worked?
Brenda, I have a question. So basically tonight at council, we're having the Mayor's Task Force on Resiliency present. And with that, the group was, I think, more weighed to the social side of things as opposed to economic. It was people generally my age. There was one individual that was quite young. But other than that, we did not have what I would call a diverse representation of our community on us. But anyways, it's still very caring and dedicated people. What ended up with recommendations and what I had noticed was that there was a concern, and I think I mentioned this to you before, of almost like their silos, protecting silos, from, different groups. And I had talked about having a community resilience coordinator to facilitate. And it was basically brought down to a second level priority based on the priority system that we came through. So it's going to be presented tonight. And I want to say something in terms of how important that role would be. And I'm just wondering if you could help me a little bit.
Well, let's lean on
an example.
No, we can lean on the group as well. I think my tendency would be to ask questions. Mm-hmm. How many stakeholders who are served by this group, were part of the process?
Okay.
Right. Because those with the lived experience, we tend not to include them.
Okay.
And the other question I would ask is ask the questions that you're concerned about, but ask them as questions. Were there businesses involved? Were funders involved? I think the other question, resiliency is a tough term for people to interpret because they interpret it in different ways. I think I've started using the word capacity and saying, do we have the capacity? Do we have the leadership capacity? Do we have the organizational capacity? Do we have the digital capacity to do what we're attempting to do?
Okay.
Because I think you want to poke holes in it, but you don't really want to, right? Any other thoughts from the rest of you? I could see some of you taking notes and thinking, or at least you really looked like you were thinking.
Linda, were you wondering specifically about making a case for the coordinator or just in general?
I would certainly like to suggest that it be considered. And I guess what I'm trying to understand more is about the timing of that. Like, does that coordinator, is that critical at the beginning? Because you've just talked about, Brenda, that we need to have like the multi-sectorial groups and stuff, which I think we do in the community. We're working on that. So how important is it to have a position that kind of overlooks resiliency overall in the community? Or is that just something that we can just have as a medium priority and potentially be considered down the road?
That's really ironic, Linda, because before you joined the call, I shared with the group and I put the link in the chat because I was really excited about 4 positions that I just saw posted with the region of Waterloo.
Okay.
So take a look at that link. And they are actually housing it under organizational development and HR. And it is, I think that exactly the kind of position that you're describing, because it's, a future focused leader is a 4th sector leader. And a lot of what's surfacing now is that if you're in business, or if you're in the nonprofit sector, or if you're in the government sector, it's really hard to change that system when you are a part of it. And so what's really seems really clear to me now is that we need 4th sector leaders, who aren't part of one of those 3. And there's a lot of evidence out there to suggest that. The World Economic Forum is one of them. That's really, their article is what twigged it for me. So you need someone who's neutral, and who isn't aligned with social services or recreation or infrastructure, who can be the catalyst for not only bringing your own municipal departments together, but who can reach out to the community and bring in the stakeholders and the businesses and the funders and the other governments, right? And it's a different set of skills. And the reason why I get excited about these kind of job positions is because it is the competencies that you've learned in this course. Like, that's the kind of position that any of you could fill, because you have a better understanding of what's needed now and how to do it. Well, actually, maybe after today's webinar, and there's missing pieces in today's webinar and next week's, after the end of it. Yeah. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, it makes perfect sense to me. I just don't know how to, here's the thing, you don't want to be the know-it-all. You don't want to be, which I sometimes end up looking like, because I'm asking questions, and then I'm always reading and researching and then sharing some ideas. So I don't want to look like I'm the expert here, but I do want to, as you said, maybe put some food for thought.
You got to poke at people, and sometimes you do that with the questions.
Okay.
I mean, and a lot of times you're asking the questions that you already know the answers to.
Yes.
Right, because you know what's needed, but ask them the question so you can make them go, huh? Right? Like the dogs when they tilt their heads, huh? That's what you're going for.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, for example, the FCSS department changed their department name to community development. And honestly, because of, I think, some of these discussions, and I'm all for, without question, social services is huge, but there are many more components to this, as you've talked about, environment and infrastructure and economic, and how do you tie all those together in a community? And maybe, I don't know if we're ready for it. I mean, I'm not sure.
Well, I think we have to be ready for it.
Well,
I think we have to be, so we have to make, but I think, and I used to suggest and think that, I still think that, and even the futurists that I'm working with, still, they see community-led development as 60% of the solution.
okay.
But what they suggest we need is 20% systems thinking and 20% strategic foresight.
Okay.
And then you have to have digitization to support all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then digitization. Yeah. And I get all those things 100%, but I think you have to have that position.
Yes.
In there.
It is a neutral, it's a multi-sectoral, it's a position for what I think. And Waterloo didn't describe it exactly as I would have described it, but the elements were there. But I think it's a position that involves multi-sectoral collaboration.
Okay.
And
So
the-
that's in the chat. I can get the link.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I think it's a multi-sectoral staff position, a multi-sectoral policy. Jennifer, we talked about that in the last webinar, that the policy goes beyond community-led development to look at, it really needs to look at multi-sectoral collaboration and strategic foresight and system thinking. And the digitization piece, because nonprofits and technology for collaboration nonprofits are getting further behind in terms of their technology. And I think municipalities are as well.
And
So,
yeah,
yeah.
I agree. Oh, and one other question. So I do not see it in the chat. Is it possible just to send it? Because I don't see it in my chat. You guys see it in yours?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, where?
No,
I
if
see it.
it was sent before she joined, she wouldn't be able to access it.
Okay, I'll just paste it in again. Hang on.
Okay. Got it. Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so that's a big graphic for me in terms of thinking about where do you start? And that's why this particular module is really important, because you've got to recruit for whatever, whether it's one project, one initiative, one master plan, one neighborhood development, one department development. This is what you need to look. It's a framework that would work for any kind of transformative change. So this is where I talked about what we're seeing as being essential. So it is and I think we need to stress the fact that these are not necessarily competencies that someone who is in a position already has. We have not been taught these. And so whatever you do when you create positions or when you're trying to make a major shifts, you need to ensure that money is put into place for professional development to grow these competencies in these 4 areas. And then the process, once you have that, you can push into these 3 paths. And what we have touched on, and we're going to really dig into next week in the next module, is the actual planning framework and a lot of tools and where to find them. So this is where hopefully you can see that it starts to come together. So this is a planning framework. And this came about, again, as a result of us observing what worked. But there was never one best way. There were many ways. But we were able to define a framework. Ideally, they would happen in this order, but a lot of times they didn't. But what is different about this is that the first steps are about engaging. That it's really about engaging in others in helping to resolve and own the solutions. And typically, most of the planning processes that we're doing right now, they start at step 6. And we don't invest the time up front to engage others. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Why do you think we jump in at step 6? Historically, we have. That's where we typically start. But why do you think that is?
It's still something I think I'm tempted to start at there because it sets the direction and tone for the work you're going to do, right? So you feel like we got to start with a why. Why are we here? What's our vision? What's our values and principles? And then you move through the other ones. So I'll admit, I sometimes struggle too on where that number 6 should fit in kind of in the process of doing that 1 through 5 stuff as well.
Yeah. And it's really how we've been taught. It's how we typically get funded. We get funded for something specific. Something as specific is put in our budget. But if we don't back up a little bit and try to get there by engaging others, then we have all these amazing plans that are probably all the things we should be doing, but they never happen. And the expression is that plan ends up gathering dust on a shelf. And that's why. It's because we don't invest the time in really looking at our strengths and building engagement and ownership in the community. And we don't get to innovation either without using this kind of a planning framework. So we'll dig into that more next week, but I wanted you to think about that right out of the gate, because we need to recruit people to help you do that. And these are the competencies, and you did an assessment on this, and this has really taken oh my gosh, I don't want to really guess even how many years it's taken to really be able to define this fourth sector leadership or future focused leadership that's required. But this is what this course is based on, is really the competencies that are required for this kind of multi-sectoral collaboration and the leadership that's needed, because it is different. So we do have the competencies, and so you can use these even as part of making a case for investing in professional development, because we know that's what's needed. And the other thing that we have, that if you're interested in knowing more, I can share this with you. This has been in development for some time as well, but we have to find the competencies that are needed for organizations. And this would apply to departments and businesses as well. We've taken a lot of time to identify the 10 areas, as well as the promising practices and the indicators of each of those competencies. So just know that it's out there, that we can help you with that if you have a sense that your organization doesn't have the competencies. Okay, so
Brenda, sorry, I have to go. I just got a call here that I've got to go. I don't know how long I'll be gone for. If I can connect back in, I will, but otherwise,
okay,
we'll try and get caught up, and I'll be back next week.
I know you've had a rough week for sure. So I'm glad you were here for part of it. Take care.
Yeah, thanks guys. Bye.
Okay, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I guess, Jennifer, I know that you do a lot of work, and Melody, you do as well. And don't know as much about your work, Shanique, but does this align with the kind of work that you are doing on the whole as a community builder? I mean, not all of them, but.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Yeah,
Some of these things, yes.
Pardon me?
So some of these things do align with what I'm doing.
Okay. Yeah, because I think that's really important in terms of making a case for your work. And again, these are outcomes. These are your why. And so a lot of times people might wonder what you're doing, because it's really hard to articulate the role of a community builder, but ultimately that's what you're doing. And it is different. And again, I think this makes a case for the competencies that are needed, and why professional development is needed, and why it's different from what a lot of us have been doing up until now. Because we're really making this shift from direct service delivery and a social planning approach, and we're moving to community development. So it's a very, very different role in terms of what we prioritize. And so that's a reference, and I don't need to go through it in great detail. You're already doing it, but it's all in one place for you to explain what you do. Did you have your hand up, Shanique, or you just stretched? Okay. This is one thing that you may not have seen elsewhere, and this is because it was a result of observing, and I guess it came mostly from me, but it was really, when I was working for a municipality, I was working for the city of Niagara Falls, and it was really confusing for a lot of people because I didn't have staff reporting to me. I wasn't in charge of facilities, and I wasn't running programs. So the big thing was, well, what the heck are you doing? And it really bit me when they started to look at management. They were assessing management positions and trying to put an equity pay scale into place. And they were using really typical indicators, like how many staff report to you and what's the size of your budget, and right? And I wasn't doing that. So I really had to sit down and say, okay, well, what is it we do, and why do you spend, I was also being questioned about why I spent time with some individuals and why I was spending more time with one group than another. And so what we did see is that we have different roles as a community builder. And I think this is really important in terms of you being able to explain what you do and why it's important, because sometimes you are supporting individuals one-on-one. Well, I'll go through each of these really quickly, but sometimes you are supporting individuals, and that's your connector role, Jennifer. I think that you talked about a lot of times, right? You're connecting people to other individuals or groups or networks or who are doing the same things or have the same concerns. So sometimes it is individual. I know I used to have elected councillors would see me in a Tim Hortons meeting with somebody and they'd be like, what are you doing? They'd be like, what are you doing? Not realizing that that's what I was doing. And it wasn't always valued. But it is important because a lot of times it is about involving those with lived experience, and that's really critical. It's also about supporting individuals and groups, right? So sometimes, and that's why sometimes it takes more time. If the group is just starting up, it's about it might be about helping them with their board governance, or it might be a constitution and bylaws, or it might be convincing them to work with another organization instead of starting their own. Sometimes they just need a place to meet, or sometimes they need some help with promotion. So again, it's a different role than working with individuals. It's supporting individual groups. And then sometimes what you're doing, what I found a lot of what I was doing was providing generic help that would help a lot of different groups at the same time. So it would be about celebrating volunteer involvement, or learning more about the broader community, or providing training and opportunities for groups from different sectors. So, and also engaging them in community-led, making sure our planning initiatives were community-led. So that's another role. And I think the most important is really getting to supporting sectoral initiatives. So connecting those within a silo, but which is where we kind of get more to collective impact. But the one that we're doing the least is encouraging widespread community change. And again, you know, I think it's Linda, it's a result of what you brought up, is that it's no one's job to connect people from different sectors. It has to be someone's job. It has to be someone, it should be, got to be more than one person. It has to be a culture that values this and assigns people to work on it, and assigns dollars to bringing together nonprofits, government, businesses, and those with lived experience. And we're not doing it enough, but with the future coming at us, and certainly what COVID showcased for us, is that there's a lot of issues related to equity in particular. There's a lot of gaps that we have to identify. And that's how you do it, is by encouraging widespread community change, looking at our strengths and our gaps. Okay, so any questions about that? About those 5? Does that demystify community building? That's what I was hoping it would do. It's like, what do you do if you're a community builder? Okay. Yes, Shanique.
I do have one question. Yesterday I was telling somebody about the course and they were asking me about feedback for our team members. Is that something that we're gonna cover, or something that you think is like really, really important to motivate our staff?
Yes, and we're going to
memory.
get into some tools right now.
Okay.
Then
Okay.
we'll help with that, because recruiting your cohort, your team, and motivating them and ensuring they're in a place where they will succeed and you will succeed, that's the cohort that's really important. Yes. Good timing, Shanique. It was like you were reading my mind. Okay, so I thought, okay, so that's great, Brenda, but people want to know, where do you start? And so this is just some general information, and then we're going to go to unpack some of the specific tools that are available on the website and will be available to you free to download at any time. They're behind that wheel, and I'll show that to you in a bit. But one of the things you need to do as a community builder is just make sure that there's a database of the groups in your community. And it doesn't necessarily matter if it's a formal nonprofit or a community-minded business, but there needs to be a database, because what you want to do as a community builder is make sure that you are seen as the go-to person for understanding your community. So you want to be the source of information. And I know that when my first job as a community builder, I didn't really know where to start. And my director handed me a list of key organizations in our community with a contact name and number and email address. And he said, go meet with them. And that was the best advice I could have gotten. And so we have a template for that for you. And well, let me just go through. I'll just go through these tools. One of the things that I found important and that made this a little bit easier for me was really thinking about the types of groups in our community or our neighborhood, and just organize them by category. And what's great in most databases now or CRMs is that you can tag them. So it makes it really easy to search as well, and really search for anything specific. So think about that. And the template and it doesn't necessarily have to be complicated. This is a great project for a volunteer or for a student on a placement, to have them start to fill out these templates so that you can compile it into a database, to really look at the organization name and their mission and who the contact is and the address, email, all of that. And basically, and this is what I did when I met with all of those community groups, was really say, what are you doing? How can we help? Was the other thing too. This is another tool, and I wish I could say I was using this from the very beginning of my career as a community builder, but I wasn't. But I want to suggest that this is really critical, and I wish I had known it. But when you have a group that you are working with, it's really important to think about their terms of reference. What do they do? So even if you're recruiting a volunteer, if you're recruiting someone for your group, or if they're starting to work together as a group, or if they are applying for funding from the municipality on an annual basis, this is something that they need to look at. They really need to say, okay, what is it we're doing? Oops, what is it we're doing, and why are we doing it? The benefits are really critical. Why does this group exist? Because that speaks to their importance. And their outcomes, the benefits of being part of this group, because you're selling it to them. So what are they going to get out of it? What's in it for them? And then the outcomes. Why is this group important? What are their goals and what are their objectives? Immediate, medium, and longer term. So it's a really important investment with any group that you work with. Yeah, Linda, unmute. Yeah.
Thanks, Brenda. Somehow I don't know where to put up my hand on mine. So you get this one instead.
Okay. I see it. Don't worry.
My question is with regards to, I've never seen a terms of reference before with objectives for the upcoming year. Are you saying that a group should be updating their objectives in terms of the immediate, medium, and long term?
Yeah. How else do you hold them accountable? Yeah. And I hadn't thought of this. This really was something I kind of stumbled across when we were working in Alberta, but now I wouldn't work without it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we should be asking our organizations that we fund and support to provide us with objectives for the upcoming year. That's very good. I like that a lot.
And one of the things that I really love is that a lot of those that I have worked with previously have now passed on the learning to citizen groups. For example, they will work with a group to develop a logic model. And then the group is really well positioned to apply for funding to complete something like this. But again, it's a different set of competencies, and it's really what a community builder could and should be doing.
Wow.
The other thing that's important for any community builders to understand, and I stumbled through this for a lot of years, and it's changing even now. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I really want you to understand that when you're supporting a group or starting working with a group to start up, then you really need to understand the difference between the different kinds of groups that they can be. And I think this took me a while to understand, but then I just want to share a couple of key learnings. Is that you can be informal and unincorporated nonprofits, but what is important for you to know as a community builder is that if there's a group like that with a board of directors that are informal and unincorporated, they can move really fast. But if they're incorporated as a nonprofit and they get sued for any reason, or if they really derail in some way, the board of directors are on the hook. They can personally be sued. So that's what you need to know. It's incorporations. When you're incorporated, you are safe, because when it's incorporated, what it does is create another person, almost like an entity. So the entity would be sued for their assets, not the individual board of directors. So that's just really important to understand, and that you have to be incorporated federally as a charity, that they are the only ones that can accept donations and issue tax receipts. So it is confusing, but if you know those basic differences, it's important. I think one of the most important things I've learned a lot of times when I'm working with a group just starting up is encourage them wherever possible to do their work under the umbrella of an existing group or organization, because then that group will take care of all of the insurance and the filing of papers as a nonprofit or a charity. It just takes a lot of headaches, because I have seen too many community groups, that's all they think about is becoming incorporated as a nonprofit or a charity, and they end up spending all their time and money on that rather than their core business, their core why. So I think that's important. And what I'm also seeing kind of surface now in terms of groups is more cooperative. That's really big in Western Canada, not necessarily the rest of the country, but I'm seeing it change, and social enterprises. And I'm also seeing, I know that like the startup that I'm involved now is a hybrid of social enterprise and a nonprofit. So we're seeing more hybrids as well. So that's, again, it's an example of the kind of learning that a community builder has to have under their belt, and really have that, because you're coaching and advising others. So I wanted to mention that. And this is, the organizational tool that we have for really looks at organizational competency addresses a lot of this. But I wanted to share this because I think it speaks to the complexity of the role of what you do, is that there's a lot of, there's a lot of elements that contribute to a group being successful. So it's complicated, and actually I think it's more complicated than running a business, but I think it's more complicated than running a business, because it's like running a business, except you have to understand how to manage volunteers who don't get paid. So you have to figure out how to motivate them. They don't get paid. You've got to understand board governance, and you've got to understand fundraising. So it's even more complicated in many ways than a business. So I just wanted to share that. Meeting management is critical. And what, excuse me, what I've just included for you, what I've referenced are two templates, one to help you set a meeting agenda. A meeting agenda that is outcome driven. So that's where we spend a lot of time on outcomes. So with meetings, you also need to begin with outcomes. Why are you holding this meeting? And if you can't answer that question, maybe you just need to send people an email with some information. You're laughing, Shanique. Because we've all been to those meetings where you're thinking, why are we having this meeting? Just send me a freaking email. So that's a template for you. And if you haven't done minutes before, if a volunteer especially hasn't done minutes before, then give them a template to help them out, right? And there's also a document about handling challenging behaviors in group settings. Some specific techniques about what do you do with problem behaviors. Not that we've had any of these people, but Okay, so, and this is another tool, you know, and there's some people right now who question the validity of SWOT analysis, but I still think if you're working with a group that's struggling, if you've got a group that has stalled, or there's tension in the group, or there's conflict in the group, this is the best tool for getting to the root of it, to really have a discussion around what are our strengths, what are our challenges, what opportunities are out there, and what threats might be there. And so you can see we're talking here about transit or weak signals as
Brenda,
yeah.
I have to share, because I love this kind of alternative one that the city of Airdrie used with their youth framework. I can't remember what it's called exactly, but youth engagement or strategy framework. They use SOAR, which is a bit more of an appreciative approach, right? With the strengths, the opportunities, aspirations, what do we care most deeply about, and results, how will we know we're succeeding, which incorporates then those more of that outcomes piece that we've talked about as well too. So I've been trying to work that one into
We have that one.
stuff a little more.
Yeah, I really like that one too. We also call this one sometimes Scott. We call it strengths, challenges, opportunities, and threats. The only reason I included this one is because it's probably more common, but in our library, you will find a SOAR template as well. And that's what I said, you know, there's never one best way, there's many ways, but yeah, but I like this. I do. I'm glad you brought that up. It's a good one. And I just want to go back to this one. You've done this leadership tool because Shanique, you know, you asked about how you motivate your team. What's important about this is that your team needs to have all 4 leadership styles represented. And your job a lot of times is to find a balance of these leadership styles and to ensure there's a position for them that allows them to use their gifts, to use their strengths. So when you look at when you look at an energizer, you know, what do you think what kind of role would be important for them to where you could place them in a volunteer position or a paid position for them to succeed and for them to help you? What's that role? Or just pick anyone. An energizer, an organizer, a nurturer, or a researcher. What kind of position do you want to put them in where they will succeed?
Does the nurturer, would they be best? Well, actually, no, I shouldn't say that. I was thinking they would be good as a chair, but I'm just wondering if that individual is just trying to make everybody happy in that role.
Yeah, it might become a very long meeting. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But a nurturer is really important in meetings because they're the ones that will make sure everyone's voice is heard.
Okay.
But who do you think would be the best person to chair a meeting or to herd the, you know, it's the herding cats role? Who do you think would be best at that? There's exceptions, but still.
I would prefer the organizer because I hate those long-winded meetings where it goes off track. So an organizer is who I'd want to run my meeting.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You know, last week, the example I gave you about the woman that I asked to chair a meeting, to facilitate a meeting for us, absolutely off the chart organizer. But she used to cut off the conversations a lot of times when they were really getting good because she was really focused on getting the task done. But I think what I'm seeing is her evolving. So she let us in our last meeting kind of be the free range cats too. She let us be free range more than typical. But you're right, Sanika. I think organizers are the best at. I hate chairing meetings. I really, there are people who are good at it, so put them there. Yeah. Okay, what are the other roles where you're looking for support, like in your community work?
You want a researcher to be, you know, basically identifying the information that we require and sharing that information with us?
A lot of times your researcher would do the advanced work, or would search for promising practice once you've identified an issue, right? Yeah, Melody? Or you just,
No, I was just thinking, having someone who is an energizer, kind of gathering the troops together, right? Like someone that's like a good, don't put an energizer in like a secretary role
Yeah.
or right, like the minutes taker, like it's yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So this is something that, and this is like True Colors as well. So, but keep this in the back of your mind as you're writing position descriptions, as you're thinking about who you need on your team, because you need all four, and you need to ensure they're put into positions where they will succeed.
So can you talk more about the energizer for a second? Like, for example, we have with our Heritage Ag Society, this lady, she's just, just her very presence is energy, but she's not over the top and she's not pressure. She listens and facilitates so well. I think she's an energizer because she just really does.
Yeah.
I think she'd
Well,
be.
aren't you an energizer, Linda?
Pardon?
Aren't you an energizer?
I'm an energizer, but I'm tied with organizer.
Oh, isn't that interesting? That's really interesting. It's a very unusual combination.
I know.
But it's a good one. It just means that you're fighting with yourself all the time, because it's
Well, I think I'm fighting with myself on many. I'm energizer, organizer, researcher. I'm not nurturer at all. And when you're nurturing, I just go, oh my good Lord, I don't know what to do with that.
Well, I'll tell you, my nurturer, if we didn't have my nurturer, there's a lot of meetings we wouldn't have coffee with. But that was my nurturer. I brought out but anyway,
Yeah.
but the reason the energizer organizer is an unusual combination, because it's people versus tasks. And so an energizer is like let's get going, and it's exciting and it's new, and they're like the real cheerleader and the champion. But an organizer is like, forget this people stuff. Let's get organized. Let's get the jobs done so we can check them off the list, right? So you need both for sure. And you need the nurturers to ensure all voices are heard. And you need a researcher to make sure you're moving in the right direction and you have the information that you need. So you need all of them. But energizer, organizer it's people versus task, which makes it challenging.
There were so many people on this when we did this, that there were so many were two, and like I was close on the three, and it's challenging. Like you just kind of go, how do you just learn these behaviors and you become that?
Yes, I think that's what you do. I think you channel what is needed. And I think when you work for nonprofits, or even when you have a family, you have to channel what's needed at that time. Right. When you have young children, you have to be a nurturer.
Yeah.
Right. You have to channel that. And it might not be your inherent, and it might be something that you have to work on. I mean, I am not inherently organized. Every time I teach a course and prepare for a course, I've got to channel my organizer, and it's more tiring a lot of times. And there's some things that I'm never going to be good at, like my bookkeeping, because it's so painful for me. But sometimes you have to do it. But I think ideally, especially when you're working with volunteers, you want them to land with what they love to do and what is easy for them to do. And so I think even for yourself as a leader, find yourself a place where you can be what you want, what you love to do and what you do well, and build a team around you that has the others. And if you're balanced, you're very fortunate. You're really fortunate. And I think probably the most important thing, and one of the reasons why I think it's important for any group to do this kind of an assessment, is because it helps you learn to suspend judgment of others, because you realize that people aren't deliberately trying to annoy you. They're just different from you. They have different strengths, and that's a good thing. So you just need to keep that in mind too. Make sense? Yeah. Okay. So, and think about that in terms of the planning framework, in terms of where they might fit best in your planning initiative as well. Okay, this is a tool, Shanique, that really addresses your issue about motivating people and recruiting the right people, because I think getting, keeping, and are the people that you're working with volunteers primarily, Shanique, or paid, or both?
It's a combination of both, but it's predominantly paid, and then volunteers come in and out.
Okay, because I would use this position description, and I've used it for 20 years for paid staff positions as well as volunteers. And this template is provided for you in a Word document, so you can just make it your own and put your own logo on it. But I think the titles are really important. If you can, a lot of entry-level positions, especially, or volunteer positions, a title doesn't cost you anything, but you can make a title important, and you can and you can make it meaningful, and it doesn't cost you anything. So why not do that? So have a title. I remember one of my first jobs at the Boys and Girls Club, what our executive director did, and I thought he was brilliant. He gave us all business cards. And when you think about it, I mean, it wasn't a major investment on his part, but he gave us a case to carry the business cards in and the business cards. And it just made such a difference. I mean, we're making minimum wage, but we had business cards because we were dealing with the public. So it was important. So begin with a one or two, and ordinarily I would have given this to you as an assignment, but I felt that we had overwhelmed you enough. So, but if you can do one of these, remember this the next time you're trying to recruit somebody, use this as a template. So after the title, you need 1 or 2 sentences, because that's what's going to hook your volunteer or your paid staff person. 1 or 2 sentences that it provides a general description. But what's most important about those 1 or 2 sentences is that it really explains what the outcomes are of this position. Why is this important? What's the main purpose of this job or volunteer position? So do that. And there's a lot of positions that there's a way to do some reverse recruitment too, but a lot of positions you need people for certain jobs or certain volunteer positions that it's not worthwhile to do it for all of them, but for the ones where you're always recruiting, look at this one. Again, the benefits is kind of let them know who they report to, give them where they would be working. If it's a lot of people are looking for home-based virtual experiences, make sure that that's indicated under location. But answer the questions that what's in it for them. Now it might be that they're getting paid, but it could also be a chance to make a difference in someone's life or gain leadership experience, or it might be learning new skills for a student. It might be a letter of reference if they were a student, or even a free t-shirt. List the benefits of this and lead with that. Like that's what's going to keep them reading. And then list some examples of some specific duties and tasks, and describe what you're looking for in terms of skills and abilities and talents. Because what you want people to do is to recognize. You want them to recognize themselves. No. Oh my goodness, hang on, sorry. A dumb mouse. Yeah. Okay, so in this description, and I'll tell you, this works extraordinarily well in terms of finding the right staff position, the right person to fill a staff position, or for a volunteer position as well. It does really, really work.
I can share, I've used all of these templates and examples with the community associations that I work with here in Red Deer, because I support them as individual groups, but I also support them as a collective.
Good.
And have actually compiled these into a community association handbook so that they all have. And sometimes we still have to work on this one, the subcommittee one and the committee reporting template one. Still have to help them see the value in that sometimes. and how important that is to keep them on track and keep them moving forward. And then as well, linking these position descriptions to it as well too, because when they're just constantly recruiting for board members, and they make it sound like such a drab job and position to like, come join our community association board, we're desperate, we need people. It's like, really? Nobody's going to want to join that. So we've done a lot of work to kind of define a little bit more of the roles and even give some direction to the director's position on the board so that they have a little bit more purpose and direction there too.
Good for you, because that's kind of unusual. Not everybody has done that. So good for you, Jennifer. Because I think a lot of times what people do, and I know I was guilty of this when I first started recruiting too. It's like, we based it more on what we need versus what the individual needs. And again, it comes down to the focus on outcomes. Why is this important? Why, what's in it for you? Why would you want to do this, especially if you don't get paid? So that's great. Are you able to share that, Jennifer?
The handbook?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could send that to you.
Because I think that would be, I wouldn't share it widely, but I just think it'd be great for people to, because I'm sure it would be inspiring in terms of giving them an idea of how this could work. One of the things though that you might not have, I don't know if you have seen this, it is based on Ivan Shear's window of work. And again, I've done this as a Word document. It's a combination application for a potential volunteer, as well as a potential outline for an interview. So Shanique, this is something that might work for your volunteers. I find, I just find it probably takes you 10 to 15 minutes, but it has brilliant results. It conveys a lot about your organization. And really there's some key questions that you need to ask a potential volunteer. But Ivan Shear used to say that there's 4 things that you need to understand for a successful placement of a staff person or a volunteer. And one of them, and it's an easy one, and it's a flattering thing when you interview someone, to say, okay, well, what are your, don't have to call it glad gifts, you can call it whatever you want. But basically you're saying, what talents or skills or interests or hobbies do you do well that you would enjoy sharing? So if I asked each of you that question right now, how would you answer that? What do you do well? Like what skills or talents and there's no right or wrong answer for this. That's what's interesting about it.
I put things together easily. I can gather information and then be able to, understand how it puts together and are able to provide suggestions. And that's why lots of times I'm a very fast thinker. And so I'll come up with ideas, which then I don't want to always be that person, but I seem to go fast in that.
But if we knew that was your gift, every time we needed somebody to connect the dots or to help us explain the picture on the top of the puzzle box, we would all turn to you. Mm-hmm. That's a glad gift for sure. Anybody else? What would you share? What do you do well?
I think I'd probably say that I'm good with knowledge translation. So whatever information I do receive, I am able to communicate that to people, like maybe a grade 8 level, something that's super simple. Hopefully they'll get it after, but I think that's one skill I have.
Perfect. Okay, so how would you feel if in a potential interview for a job or a volunteer position, if somebody asked you that question? Would you be offended?
Oh no.
How would you feel? Yeah, how would you feel?
Just know when you asked, I'm like, oh my God, how would I answer this? So honestly, I'd be anxious at first.
Yeah.
But I'd be okay once I knew exactly what they were getting at. And since you explained it's a skill or interest or hobby,
yeah.
I'd be fine with being asked that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what you're trying to do is this is reversing the recruitment process. And what you're doing, hopefully, is demonstrating that you really care about this person as an individual and what they bring as their gifts. But then you're also going to ask them, what are your quests or your yearn to learn? Because if you, especially if it's a volunteer, you know, or if it's an entry-level position and it doesn't have a big paycheck, this is also explaining to them that you care and you want to provide an opportunity for them to keep learning. So you're going to say, well, what is it you're interested in learning more about? Right. And again, that conveys that we care about you as an individual. And then the third thing, and this is a really important one to ask for volunteers, because too often we totally ignore this. We ask them, okay, what are your no-nos? What is it that we should never ask you to do? What do you not want to do? It's a good one, eh? What don't you want to do? Yeah. Okay, so
I
that's,
have a question.
yeah.
So for questions 2 and 6 and even 7, is there a right or wrong answer? Because if somebody told me that they didn't want me to ask them to probably work beyond working hours, then I'd probably be like, this person may not be the best fit. Do you think there's a right or wrong answer for these questions?
No,
Sense of
aren't you better? I think you're both better off knowing.
okay.
Yeah, like I think these are the kind of things that make or break staff positions, as well, especially volunteer positions. You're better off to know it up front. But the last question, number 7, is a really critical one. And it wasn't one that Ivan Shire, he came out of volunteer management many years, and unfortunately he's passed away since, but I keep revising and using this form because it really works. But number 7 was not a question he originally asked, but he learned that one of the things you need to understand about a staff person or a volunteer is to understand their values, to make sure their values fit within your organizational culture. So the 7th question is, I think the world would be a better place if, so if I asked you that question, what would you say? I think the world would be a better place if.
My answer is radical, but it would be more similar to Cuba's society.
And you know what? And I would ask you, why is that?
That's because I believe it does create equality. And I'm hoping too that it does lead to equity. So that's why I'd be like, yes, if I could design the world, it would be better if that were the case.
There you go. And you know, and you don't necessarily have to even mention the Cuba, because people might have other perceptions of Cuba, but the core of what you just answered, Shanique, tells me so much about you. Like, would tell anybody a lot about you and your values. And that's really important. So good for you. And the only reason I said that about Cuba, Shanique, is because I had a friend who was very idealistic and was going to move to Cuba. And then when she moved there, she and her husband lasted 6 months and moved back to Canada because they were concerned about a lot of different things in Cuba. Their feeling was that it wasn't all it was cut out to be, but that's another story.
I've heard of people's experiences there, so it's not the best. But
Yeah.
for me,
No,
the equality, and I guess that's the part I'm looking at, not the other communist part.
well, the way you explained it was brilliant. It really
Okay.
was. Yeah, no, it was good. I totally got it.
You know,
And I
but
love Cuba
Oh,
too, Shanique. So
Yeah. I love Cuba as well.
15 years ago, I've heard it's changed a lot in the last few years and maybe doesn't hold that same quality that it did have. And like you're saying, equality of 15 years ago, but yes.
Yeah, you know, my friends, my friend's perception was that they weren't always walking the talk. And there was things like the lineups for food and every day, like at that point were really, that was a couple of years ago. Well, more than a couple of years, but yeah, anyways.
There's flaws in everything, but, going back to, what would be a better world is if we love thy neighbor as we love thyself, if we just go back to the 10 commandments and just really just treat others as you'd like to be treated. And, and we're not all equal, but equity is without question very important. And there has to be a base level of, as unacceptable for anything, and that's the world I would envision.
Well, that's so funny, Linda, and because I think that's a great answer, and it explains a lot about you and your values. But it's really funny to me because I just had that same conversation at a family, really small, socially distanced family gathering, but with my mother, because we grew up with that. The do unto others as you would have them do unto you. We grew up with the golden rule, and my mother got it from her father and her grandfather. So it's, yeah, that's a great answer. One of the funniest answers that I've heard, it's not really funny, but it was kind of was. I had someone in the Northwest Territories who started using this to recruit volunteers. And she had this older gentleman, retired, come to her and said that he really wanted to volunteer. And so she didn't know him all that well. And so she used this kind of a format. And what came out in the course of the interview was that he said he really, his glad gifts were that he knew everything about guns. It's interesting. So she's kind of like, okay. And his yearn to learn, his quests were that he wanted to do more with youth. That was really important for him. And so she's in her head, she's kind of spinning around thinking about guns and youth, and maybe that's not a great idea. But here's the end result. As a result of the conversation, is that he ended up working with youth to teach them gun safety, which is really important because hunting is a big issue. I mean, it is a really important for survival in the Northern Territories. But then what happened with the youth is that they worked together to build a paintball course. So they learned a lot about team building and building, like construction, and as well as gun safety. And what they ended up doing was using this paintball course, not only for their own entertainment and recreation, but they used it as a fundraiser for the youth center. And so I thought, I mean, it just goes to show you, if you get to know the person and where they're coming from and their values, because she realized in asking him about the world would be a better place, his answer was about valuing youth and their capacity, their potential. And that's exactly what he did. So I just think it's a great tool. And it's one I don't see a lot of others using, but even if you do a variation of it, it does work.
Can I just ask one question?
Of course.
I wanted to ask Jennifer, I'm trying to, I guess I'm starting to see your role as you are a community development officer. And I didn't, and I'm sure maybe there's others too. I didn't kind of connect all those dots until you just discussed some of your role. Now, I know we introduced ourselves before, but I didn't really realize what we're doing. I thought it was more of a role of, maybe basically through the organization supporting services and recreation of the community, of the government as opposed to others.
Yeah, I would say I'm in a bit of a unique position where I'm at. So my job title is community facilitator and working in community development section of the city of Red Deer. But I do everything from supporting our community associations, and like I mentioned, kind of on that individual group level, but also on a broader level, researching, finding tools, sharing resources with them and stuff like that. But I also do work with more community-led projects as well. And so different initiatives that pop up. So some of them are around youth initiatives or funding, FCSS funding that's been allocated to the community and supporting those groups in developing their projects or programs. And then I do a lot of coalition support work as a facilitator too. So I work like with our High Risk Youth Coalition here in Red Deer. And we have a lot of my stuff lately is more focused around the youth initiatives, or has been, I guess, typically in the past. So that part gives me more of the pure facilitation aspect of it, where some of the programming I get wrapped into more nitty gritty. Again, like I said, this year being a little bit of an exception, we're doing more direct programming than we typically would. And we are very much in that. I love the side by side, Brenda, that you always show of the social planning versus the community development. And our department, in their defense, was called social planning. previously. So we are still very much transitioning to that community development model and role, and really incorporating that into our organization. I think we still have a long ways to go. And what I love about this, and like we've been talking about, is defining our role a little bit more, because sometimes when people talk about community development or community led, they jump right into, okay, well, the community should do it all. Jen, get out of there, just let them do it. But they need that leadership, they need that guidance, they need that support, they need the tools, the resources. It's my paid job to do that, when a lot of the people that work, especially with community associations, are volunteers, or that come together for these extra boards and projects. They're volunteering like their own time, right? So I feel like my role in helping define it more too is, you know, being the one who can provide that information and stuff to those groups. So I'm still needing to develop that out a little bit more, as we are community development section formally now, and feed that back up to help explain my position and our role and the way we work in the community a little bit different. So like I said, some of those visuals I definitely will be using to show why it's important, and how our perhaps definition of what a leader is isn't maybe what they traditionally thought it was, but it's also not the far extreme either of getting out of the community altogether. So finding that happy medium.
Jennifer, where are you housed, under what department in Red Deer?
Well, we just restructured this year, so we are called the Safe and Healthy Communities Department.
Okay,
So what they did was they amalgamated social planning with culture and recreation.
makes sense. That makes sense. That does.
Yeah, we're still figuring it out and making sure it makes sense, but
And I
think
like what you said about,
everybody who had direct work or influence with the community together into one department.
I like,
Oh, I was about to say I have a follow-up question for Jennifer.
go ahead.
Sounds very familiar, and I think it's similar to a group that's under AUMA. Would you be a part of that as well?
I've done a little bit with that. Yeah. I mean,
we were invited.
We do operate under AUMA, so.
Okay, because we did a presentation with them in December at the Safe and Healthy Communities meeting. So I'm wondering if you were.
Probably wasn't at that one, but I wish I was.
So based on this course, and what are one or two things that you would like to change going forward now? Like, how do you think you'd have the greatest impact going forward?
I still think a lot of it is around defining our roles as leaders. And I love, Brenda, too, like that, the new image that you shared at the beginning, right, with the 4-sector leadership and stuff, and how you start, like, number one is developing the leadership. And I think understanding and helping my community understand better the different types of leaders and roles of leaders. So I'm a leader in my role as a community facilitator working for the city, but there are also community leaders out there in the community working for organizations and groups, and we're all leaders, but how do we work together in that bubble to then start having those bigger impacts on those micro and macro projects?
That's good. Because it is about building their capacity. I think, you know, all of this talk about sustainability, the only thing that's sustainable is investing in leadership. And for me, leadership is not a title, it's a behavior. And so everyone really needs to think of themselves as a leader. So yeah.
I think, Brenda, I was going to ask you too, because I like I said, I find that in this shift towards more community-led development and stuff, right? You know, with my organization, then they go to the extreme where it's like I said, okay, get out. They're the community leaders, community-led development, community-led projects eliminates your role. And it's like, but it doesn't. And so it's still helping to understand and define that, I think, a little bit more going forward is how we as leaders working for our organization support community-led development.
But that's what I like what you said, because I think it what you said about your job is to support them and share information. And I think our job as community builders, when we work with the community, is to share information and resources to help them make informed decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's becoming more important because, you know, community groups used to be able to muddle their way through, but now it's so complicated that they need a guide on the side. And that's
Yeah.
what, it's capacity building that you do, I think,
Yeah, very
right?
much.
And it is the capacity in those areas that we've identified as being important for leadership. So yeah, I think you're right on the money. I think
There's got to be one more question with this though, which is how do you tie then planning, infrastructure, and like, and I'll give you an example. Like if you were doing, you wanted to enhance the resilience of a community and you decided to create a town hall. And in that town hall, you also realized you wanted to recognize the Indigenous group. And so you wanted to maybe have a park and a meeting space there. And maybe you wanted to have some, like, who would you work with? How would you do this? To anybody that wants to answer.
Yeah,
I was looking at Jennifer.
I would go to the whole community. Like, I think like we talked about last time, I think it was like that you would bring all of those people to the table.
And it's
And
not,
some will stick with you in some parts and some won't. And some things will excite people more than others. And, you know, they'll invest in that aspect of it. And other parts, they won't be as interested. But
So
I
who's
think it's
the person
providing
that's
that
going to bring them
opportunity.
all together? Is that you, Jennifer? Are you that person that's going to bring it together?
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's why I often say, I feel like my title too, I mean, capacity builder, community convener, like I use that one a lot too.
because it is a broad issue, you know, because it's Indigenous cultures, it's different cultures, it's like, how do we, you know, the question really is, how do you ensure a town hall that represents the cultures that make up your community?
And in that role, I'm very much am a facilitator. And so sometimes I have to very like distinguish between my facilitator role and
Yeah, you
know,
can't do
my
both.
program or project lead role, right? Facilitator's got to stay very neutral and
That's why sometimes you have to,
process driven.
yeah, sometimes you have to bring in an outside facilitator so you can add your
Yeah.
voice. Because yeah, that's another whole webinar for sure. And
Thank you, everybody. This just put it all together beautifully for me. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate you asking the questions. I really do. I don't want to keep you, but I just did want to show you two things. One is that, and I have shown you this before, but this is the planning framework and it is like a recipe book, and you click on any one of these steps and it will take you to all of the facilitative tools and techniques. See, so we do have a SWOT or a SOAR analysis here. There's different tools that you can use at each phase. So I just wanted you to, and we're continuing, you know, there's about 400 tools in total, but it is a recipe book, you know, in the sense that some will speak to you and some will not. But we've tried wherever possible to give you templates that you can adjust as well and customize for your community. So that remains and will always be a work in progress. But the reason I wanted to share that, especially now, is because next week's topic and assignment is important to share. In that we're really going to expand on how you actually can apply a community development approach. And we're giving you a template, and the template is already uploaded because your job is going to be to complete this template for a project or initiative that hopefully is a real one that you are doing or want to do. And it looks like it's a Word document. Oh, wrong one. Oops. Sorry. That's what happens when I try to do it in a hurry.
I did share that framework recently, Brenda, with my smaller community development section and encourage them all to look at it, so that I said when I use this language and when I say I really want to work through a community development planning process with our associations and neighborhoods, that they understand what I'm talking about, because I think sometimes people have a different definition or understanding of what that is. And so I'm like, please look at this so you know what I mean when I use this terminology.
Good for you. Oh, they're so lucky to have you. That's great. Yes, it is. There is I think what you're in a tough position now because you're shifting the culture. And that's hard for any leader because it's often a lonely place, right? So,
And I'm doing it from a bottom up
yes.
position as well too. I passed on a supervisor opportunity recently. So there were some aspects I didn't want to take on and some stuff I wanted to be able to do where I'm at right now. And so sometimes that makes it even harder that had I taken that, maybe I'd have more influence, but I'm still trying to influence from bottom up.
Go talk to Kristen Walsh. I don't know if you've met her yet. You have to talk to her.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to meet her yet. So
Can I email her and tell her she needs to talk to you?
yes,
I'll do
of
that.
course.
Okay. So what will make this easier to implement next week is that the planning process is explained in a Word document that's already been uploaded for you. And it has a template in it for you to design your own process, including the tools that you will use. And so that's a template that you can share with others as well, because it explains each of the steps in more detail and why we're using this approach, why it works. Okay? And that's really what I wanted to share with you, because ideally, and I know this is a big ask, but ideally you will have a chance to read that document, and you can't do all 10 steps. I'm not asking you to do 10 steps. I'm asking you to do the first 4. Because you can't do the rest of it until you actually hold this or work with this group. But it'll give you an idea of how those first steps are, why they're important, what you need to do in each step, but then choose a tool, or in some cases, a couple of tools that will help you at each step. Okay?
Mhm.
All right, well, thank you for a really enjoyable session. I love learning from all of you. I really do appreciate that. So thanks so very much. Any last questions before we?
I have one final question. For some strange reason, I thought we were going to the 28th of June. I just realized next week is our last week. Will that be our final wrap-up session, or would we meet after?
Well, what I want to do we could continue to meet, but what I want to allow for next week is to cover this planning process, but I want to leave at least half of the session for any last questions or in terms of moving forward that you may have. I should also tell you that the other startup that I'm involved in is called the Fourth Sector Network.
Mm-hmm.
We are going, I mean, the emphasis is on bringing people together like you. And I can share a little bit more about that next week, but I think you're going to be right at home.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. And you will have a chance to meet with others like you, which is a piece I think we've been missing, is how do you continue the dialogue and the learning that happens. So that will be happening. So yeah, there's a lot of interest in that. So actually, even where I'm meeting with a number of groups that are related to the United Nations and the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's pretty exciting. So you're good? You're all.
Oh, you're muted, Linda.
Brenda, I just want to chat with you for a minute after if you have.
Yes, I'll stay. Okay.
Thanks.
Alrighty, bye.
Thank you all. Have a great week. Thanks for showing up. I know there's a lot going on and I know you're tired.
Yes.
I so appreciate you hanging in there. So
I just wanted to share, there was one thing I read recently, and it was from a while back, but it came across my desk again around burnout. But it was talking about when you're working and living your passion, it doesn't matter how much work or energy you invest into it, because you're getting back from the work you're doing because you believe so strongly in it. It's when we're doing stuff that we don't enjoy, that we're not a good fit for, that's not in line with our values and stuff, that we get burned out. And so I have to say, I've been the busiest I have ever been in the last 2 months, probably. But I'm feeling good because it is stuff that I'm passionate about. It's aligning with the things that I believe and that I'm learning and putting it all together. So it is energizing and motivating. And it's interesting how you can do much less and feel so much more burnout that when you're doing more and it's something you enjoy, it's good.
I totally relate. That also explains why I've had a lot of different jobs.
But isn't that
Gotta go over the energy.
Yeah. I think it takes a while to understand what your strengths are and how you fit in the bigger thing. But I look at this course and I'm behind because I'm not in the work exactly that you guys are, and yet I'm understanding it and knowing that this is what needs to be done. And so I just love it. I just absolutely love this learning process. So very, very pleased to be part of it and pleased to know all of you.
Likewise. Thank you for sharing that. And thanks for you as well, Jennifer, for sharing that because I totally get that. I understand. I really do. So thank you all. Have a great week. And I'll stay connected, Linda, because I know you wanted to talk, but
Thanks.
adios. Have a good one. Hang in there.
Bye.
Take care.
Thanks, Brenda. We just
Hang on just 1 sec. I just want to stop the recording, okay?